Hey guys, how's it going? In this video we are gonna learn how we can drop items outside of our inventory. For this tutorial we are gonna use this method to destroy the items, but you can then use this logic to do whatever you want, like instantiate a 3D model of your item in your game world. Let's jump right in and start with the simplest, most naive implementation. First, I'll create a new UI image under our canvas. I'm going to stretch it to fill the entire screen. I will drag it to the top of the canvas hierarchy so that it renders behind all other objects, and then I'm going to change its color variable and set the alpha to 0, making it completely transparent. Let's rename this image Drop Item Area. And let's create a script with the same name in the examples folder. Opening that script in Visual Studio, we can delete the Unity default stuff. Let's add the Unity engine.event systems namespace and implement the iDrop handler interface. We'll then declare a new public event of type action, and for this we need to use the system namespace, and let's call it onDropEvent. In the drop method, we'll call the drop event, making sure that we check if it is different than null before doing so. That's all we need for this script. As you can probably tell, this is just going to serve as a general area where we can detect if we dropped our items outside the inventory. What we actually do with them when we detect that they have been dropped is another story. For that, we need to go into the character script. In the character script, we need to add a reference to the drop item area. We can do that by adding another serialized field of type drop item area. After that, we need to set it up by assigning a listener to its event. We do that by coming down into the start method, and here in the section where we are assigning the drop events, we go drop item area dot onDropEvent plus equals, well, some other method that we don't currently have implemented yet. We obviously don't want to use our existing drop method because that is dealing with dropping items from one slot to another. And for this we need different functionality. So let's make a new method right under our current drop method. Let's call it drop item outside UI. From the implementation of our existing drag and drop code, we know that whenever we are dropping an item, we have the drag item slot available to us with the item that we are currently dragging. So, in the drop item outside UI, let's use that. First, we need to check if it's null, because if it is, there's nothing that we can do and we can just return out of this method immediately. If it isn't null, being in this method means that we are dragging the item outside of our UI, so let's just destroy it. And after destroying it, we need to set the item variable on that item slot to null. With our new method now implemented, let's assign it as a listener to the onDropEvent of the drop item area. Going back into Unity, we must not forget to add our drop item area script to our drop item area game object, and also drag the object into the drop item area variable on the character script. Testing this out in play mode, we can already see that we can destroy items by simply dragging them outside the inventory. Now that we have the simplest version of this code working, wouldn't it be nice to at least display a message to the user asking him if he's really sure that he wants to destroy an item? Well, let's do that right now. Let's create a new UI window with some text for the question and 2 buttons for yes and no. This is probably the most boring part of the video, so I'm just going to speed it up a little bit. The basic gist of this window is quite similar to the crafting window. The background image is going to be the same, and the buttons are going to be the beige buttons. Let's make a new script to add to this dialog. I want to make this script pretty generic, so I'm not going to reference anything about dropping items or destroying them. It's just a simple dialog window with a question of yes and no. So the script is going to be called question dialog. Once again, opening it up, we can delete the Unity's default methods. And for the question dialog, I want to declare two events. One for yes, and another for no. We'll also need to declare two functions, one for yes and one for no. Both of these methods will do code that we're very familiar with by now, which is simply checking if the corresponding event is not null and calling it if so. Now in the character script, we're going to need a reference to the question dialog. And then in the drop item outside UI method, instead of destroying the item directly, we're going to go question dialog set active true to enable it, because it's probably going to be disabled by default. And then on the yes event, we're going to assign something that we still don't know what it is yet. So let's create a new method for the code that we are going to assign to the yes event. I'm going to make a generic destroy item in slot method. It's going to receive a base item slot, and it's going to destroy the item that is in there, and assign the item variable to null to update the visuals. And in the yes event, we're going to call the destroy in item slot method by passing in the drag item slot. But this is not compatible with the yes event. The yes event is essentially a void method that does not receive any arguments, while the destroy item in slot method receives one argument. So we can create a new lambda expression, essentially creating a new function that receives no arguments, that's why the empty parenthesis, and then calls the destroy item in slot method, passing it as an input parameter the drag item slot. And after we destroy the item, we probably want to disable our question dialog window. In Unity, let's drag our question dialog script into our destroy item dialog game object. We also need to drag the dialog to the corresponding variable in the character script, and we also need to assign the methods that we created to each of the buttons. In the onClick method list of each of the buttons, by selecting both of them at the same time, we can edit them quicker. We can add a new method by clicking the plus button, dragging any object with a script on it, and then from the list on the right, we can select which script we want our method to be and select the method that we want to run when the button is clicked. For the yes button, it's going to be the onYes button click, and for the no button, the no button click. We should also probably disable the dialog by default so that it doesn't show whenever we enter play mode. Testing this, we are immediately presented with a few issues. The first one is that we can still interact with the UI in the background even when the dialog is showing. That's something that we probably don't want to allow. The other is that when we click the yes button, we get a null reference exception in the destroy item in slot method. Why is that? Well, we know from our drag and drop code that when the drag ends, we set the drag item slot back to null. And when the question window is open and we click the yes button, the drag is already over, so the drag item slot is null, and we're going to call this method with a variable that has its value at null. So we're going to get a null reference when we try to access the item from it. To prevent this from happening, we need to capture this variable in a temporary variable inside this method, and then use that variable that we created to call the destroy item in slot method. This is a bit of an advanced concept, but the logic for this is as follows. When we call this with the drag item slot variable, which is a class variable, it's going to use the value of that variable, whatever that value is, when the method is called. If instead we capture the value of that variable in a local variable inside this method, it's basically going to save the value at the current time that we captured it and call the destroy method with that value instead. So that solves our basic destroy issue. But if we try to destroy more than one item, you can see that we are still getting null reference exceptions. Why is that? Well, we are constantly adding new listeners to the yes event, but we are never resetting them. To reset the event, we would need to do something like this. But C# has an interesting restriction, where if you declare an event inside a class, you cannot clear the listeners from that event, except from inside that very same class. So we can't do this line of code right here. So to fix that, instead of setting the object active and inactive manually here, let's remove these calls and go into the question dialog script and create two new methods. A show method and a hide method. And these methods are going to enable and disable the game object respectively. Besides that, we are going to use the show method to reset the events. Then, in the character script, whenever we need to use the question dialog, we will instead call the show method. And we're also not going to call the hide method in the destroy item in slot function, because this is only going to run when we click the yes button. So instead, let's go back to the question dialog, and whether we click the yes or the no button, we can simply call the hide method anyways. So okay, finally, our destruction of items is working for as many items as we want. There's just the problem that when the window is open, we can still interact with the items in the background, which is kinda weird. So let's fix that now. The simplest way to do that is to basically just make a click blocker, essentially something that covers the entire screen and blocks clicks from reaching the objects behind it. We essentially just need an image stretched to fill the entire screen with the raycast target option enabled. To include that as part of our dialog, we need to change its hierarchy a little bit. Let's create a new object that is basically going to be the parent of all our current objects. I'm simply going to call it background. And I'm going to copy all of the properties from our current parent object into that one. Basically, we just need to right-click each component and then right-click the new object and paste component as new. Except for the question dialog script. That one is going to remain on the parent object. We can then remove the image and the canvas renderer. Then we need to select our three objects, the text and both buttons, and parent them to the background object. Now we can go into the destroy item dialog game object and set it to stretch to completely fill the screen. Now we can create a new UI image under it, put it as the first object in the hierarchy, also set its anchors to stretch, and set its transparency to not completely transparent. Let's give it something like 50 in the alpha channel, just so that we can visibly see that there's something overlaying all of our UI. This will make it clearer for the user that he is not going to be able to interact with objects behind it. And now we can once again disable the dialog game object. And if we run our scene again, when the dialog is showing, we have our click blocker working and we can no longer interact with our UI behind it. And we can still click the yes and no buttons just as we expected. So this is it for this video. I hope this has been useful and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace!